Hi, my name's Phil Craig and I'm the leader of the Referendum Party, and I'm just making this short video today to answer one of the questions that I get asked more than any other about Cape independence, and that is it actually possible? Is it legally possible? And the answer to that is absolutely, unequivocally, without a shadow of doubt, that yes, Cape independence is possible. Now, I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's going to be an easy process, because it's not, but I am going to tell you that it's actually a very, very simple process procedurally. I'm just going to talk it through to you so you can make up your own mind. So first of all people have a right to self-determination, and that's the sort of starting point of Cape independence. That is a fundamental principle of international law, and it's recognised in the South African Constitution, and South Africa itself has ratified three major international agreements which affirm this right, that all people have the right to self-determination, and that of course includes the Western Cape people. Then, how do those people choose to exercise their self-determination, particularly in the form of independence? Well, it's understood that the correct means to establish what a people want is a referendum, and that is the norm all around the world. And in many countries, there's a fight to get a referendum. But actually in South Africa, provincial premiers have the right to call referendums. It's in the South African Constitution. Section 1272F grants premiers the right to call referendums. So therefore, the Western Cape does not need the national government's permission to hold a referendum on Cape independence. It just needs the premier to call one. Now, there's a political issue here because Alan Winding doesn't want to call one, and that's a separate issue, but it's certainly not a legal issue. We'll deal with the political issue separate. So we have a right to self-determination. We have a right to hold a referendum. People say, well, fine, you hold that referendum, but actually referendums aren't binding in the South African Constitution. Well, referendums are rarely binding or not binding. In fact, the Constitution doesn't say whether they're binding or not. They're just a referendum. It's the democratic expression of the will of that particular people, in this case, the Western Cape people. But actually, this is a question which has been considered in international law, and international law obviously applies to all countries equally. And we do have an answer to this, and the answer was provided by the Supreme Court of Canada in the case of Quebec against Canada, to understand what was going to happen when Quebec held an independence referendum. Was it going to be binding or not? And it was quite clear in that situation that, first of all, at the end of the referendum, that in this context, Quebec wouldn't be able to just do whatever it wanted. It would have to sort of continue with its constitutional obligations to Canada in the immediate aftermath. It would have to negotiate for its independence. But equally, the law was absolutely clear that Canada simply cannot refuse Quebec the right to independence. There has to be a difficult negotiation where everybody's interests are taken into account, and actually through that, Quebec would have its independence. People say, well, look, the Canadian law doesn't apply in South Africa. Well, it's not Canadian law, it's international law. And actually, in arriving at that judgment, Canada consulted legal experts from all around the world. And later, the UK Supreme Court, in the case of Scotland, arrived at the same conclusion and led heavily on this Quebec judgment. So that's absolutely the case. So here we are. Let's recap. All people have the right to self-determination. They establish what they want to do through a referendum which provincial premiers can call without the need of the South African national government. If the Western Cape then votes for independence, it can't just do its own thing, but the South African national government cannot say no either. So it's not a question that it's not binding. It leads to a negotiation between the Western Cape government and the South African government. And the final question that people say, well, what happens if the South African government just ignores you and doesn't negotiate? Well, it's not as simple as that. And for there we go to the International Court of Justice in 2010 in the Kosovo judgment. And in exactly that situation where Serbia didn't want Kosovo to leave and wasn't willing to negotiate for its independence, Kosovo just left anyway. And the International Court of Justice said, look, in international law, there is no prohibition on the unilateral declaration of independence. If a country wants to just declare itself independence, it can, and there's no law against that, and that's exactly what Kosovo did. So that's the ultimate position of the Western Cape. If the South African national government refuses to negotiate with the Western Cape, it can just declare itself independent anyway. Now, it wouldn't really want to do that. That would be an absolute last resort. But the South African government definitely wouldn't want it to do that anyway, which means that actually there really is an obligation on all parties to negotiate a sensible conclusion, because it would be in neither party's interest to have this unilateral declaration of independence, which would be perfectly legal. So there's our process. Absolutely possible, yes. All people have a right to self-determination. The Western Cape has a right to call a referendum on Cape independence. The South African government cannot ignore the outcome of that that referendum. And if it tries to ignore the outcome of the referendum, the Western Cape can declare itself independent anyway. So yes, Cape independence is possible. The key issue is not the law. The key issue is for people who want Cape independence to vote for it, to vote for the future that they want. And that is a first world future. That's a future where our children are going to inherit this beautiful country and are able to carry on to the next generations, and we're going to leave behind this first world country at Africa's southern tip, and we can do that as long as you vote for it. What do you have to do? You have to vote for the referendum party. Vote for us. We'll get you the referendum. Cape independence will follow. Thank you.